Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Awesome. All right, so we've got a real tech audience here tonight as I mingled with people beforehand, and we're excited to hear your story. And so let's jump in right at the beginning of some of your entrepreneurial experiences and what helped prepare you to get to where you're at today.
Good question. Okay, so my experience with technology goes back to when I was young. This will date me a little bit. You can probably tell about how old I am just by looking at me. But my dad was a bit of a visionary in that we were the first house in my neighborhood that had a computer. It was a TRS-80 Model 3.
Awesome.
I don't know if anybody knows what that even is. All right, yeah.
One fan.
And he bought that specifically because he thought it would be good for his kids. So, I owe a lot to my dad for that. And taught myself programming with that terrible old technology that was actually quite wonderful. I think it was a little bit easier to actually get started and get going back in that day when it was a little bit simpler. So that's where my interest in this kind of thing started. Entrepreneurial experience. This is my first pony ride.
Yeah.
I did work at a startup previously. I worked at Mozy, which I know there's at least a couple people here that have an experience with Mozy as well. That was a great experience. I was very early, first 10 guys that were there, and really got a kind of a hunger for that kind of an environment. And so I got to go through the experience there of it growing and eventually having a successful exit, and really wanting to replicate that environment. Not necessarily that business, but that environment in the ability for people to come together, a small group of people to make something and make a difference.
So what was that first programming language that you learned on?
It was BASIC, good old BASIC.
Sweet. So did your parents have a background with education? Did that influence you later in life?
Yeah, their background in education is that neither of them had gone to college.
Wow.
So, yeah, my father worked for the Air Force. I grew up in northern Utah by Hill Air Force Base, civilian employment there. So he provided very well for our family, comparatively. Even without a formal college level education, they were both quite well read and very interested in our education.
That's cool. So take us, what schools did you attend? How did you decide picking a major? And what was that decision process like for you?
Yeah, great. Another great question. So I went to BYU here in the Valley. And when I entered, I wasn't sure if I was going to study computer science or fine arts.
Those aren't on the same end of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't learn until later. There's this philosophy, and I don't know anything about Zen Buddhism, but I have learned something about it, and I know that there's sort of this philosophy that there are these different practices that people that sort of observe that philosophy or that religion engage in, including calligraphy and types of martial arts, and really they do that because they say those are all one thing. They're really the same thing, and I think that's very much true for what impassioned me. I like to create things and build things, and so really the place that I go in my mind, I haven't really done much drawing or painting in many years, but the place that state that you get to in your mind when you're doing that is very similar to I think the place where you get when you're writing an app or trying to create a beautiful website or any of those things.
So is your code as beautiful as it sounds?
No, my code is not beautiful.
And so then was it a big deal when the Apple II came out with all the new font faces? Were you actually excited for that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So computers went from a tool that you could do spreadsheets and word processing to ones that you could do more creative things with, and that was very exciting. I think even I remember watching some shows on television about computer art, and they were these terrible 16 color 200 pixel by 100 pixel designs that people would come up with, and there were even, in the early days, some of these were even displayed in art galleries in certain parts of the country.
Wow.
As this new medium. So even a long time ago, that was going on, long before we thought we could ever do photo manipulation or video manipulation of computers.
The great irony is that Flappy Bird probably existed then too, or could have.
Flappy Bird is genius.
Right. So, with your education at BYU, you left school. Did you get a job right out of school?
Yeah. So I graduated from BYU. I did both a bachelor's and a master's degree there in computer science. Really benefited from an experience that started in my undergraduate years with the professor who would become my advisor for my master's thesis. I started working in his lab as an undergraduate and continued on. It's Dr. Flanagan, if any of you know him. Spent some good years there and really enjoyed it. Left there, left there to actually work with a small contracting firm in Salt Lake and spent a number of months working specifically for Zions Bank on a project, doing just typical enterprise, Java development.
You make it sound so boring.
Yeah, no, actually it was an interesting project.
Okay.
I got to work in downtown Salt Lake, up on the 10th floor or something of the building, kitty corner to Temple Square. So that was cool. About that same time, this is a fun story. I got a postcard in the mail from MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, and it said, something like, "Dear Alan, please submit your resume, something, something." I showed it to my wife and I said, "It's funny, they got the wrong guy." and I threw the postcard away and didn't really think much more about it, but they actually called me a couple days later and asked me to come interview. So that was cool. I went out there and interviewed and got a job working for one of MIT's research labs. One of the interesting things was, I wasn't sure why they were interested in me or why they reached out. And about a month in, my boss came into the room. I shared a room with one other guy, and he said, I don't know why we hired either of you. That's what he said.
That's awesome.
And we both looked at each other and said, are you telling us something? And he's like, "Oh, no. I mean, I don't actually remember what it was we were working on." Anyway, it turned out they were before they'd hired me, they were working on this. This is an interesting link. They were working on this distributed storage system, and I had done my master's thesis in not distributed storage, but in single system disk I/O performance studies. And so I think that was the connection. I never actually worked on that project there. I ended up flying around on a 1960s era Boeing 707 doing interesting experiments with ad hoc networking, which was a really cool experience as well. And I got to rub shoulders with some really, really amazing people there. Was able to enroll in some graduate courses down on campus, which also kind of are directly related to what I'm doing right now.
So give those in the audience who don't have quite a familiarity with Lincoln Labs, what's the context behind that? What are some other projects that they've pumped out?
So Lincoln Labs is I guess you could call it one of the national labs. The campus for Lincoln Labs is actually separate from MIT's campus. It's a few miles away, and they do that because they're doing a lot of sensitive or secret work for the government, classified work, work with the military, work with communication systems, and all sorts of different things. So it has its foundation in what was called the RAD lab, or the radar lab that kind of sprung up around World War II in conjunction with MIT, and where they did some of the pioneering work in radar technology. They also have a deep history in a lot of things. Some of the first satellite communications were systems that were developed there. Magnetic core memory, which was one of the first types one of the early innovations in computer memory systems was developed there. A technique for protecting data and doing satellite communications called erasure coding was developed there. It's a technology that we use today at SpaceMonkey.
So you were pretty excited to land this gig?
Yeah, it was a great experience. I was out there for about 3 years. It was a place where I felt like I could probably spend the rest of my career there if I wanted to. And Boston's a cool place to live. But we eventually ended up back here for some family reasons. And I took a job with Novell. I thought it would be interesting. I hadn't ever had an experience with a big Fortune 500-ish kind of company, which Novell I think technically still was at that time. So spent a couple of years there and eventually ended up at Mosey here as well.
Okay, so the transition between Novell and Mosey, reasons?
Yeah, okay. Novell was good to me. I started at Novell. Novell had, one of the reasons I was interested in taking that job was because they had just committed to a strategy which was pioneering at the time, which was to move off of their sort of legacy network systems and put more focus on Linux. This was 10 years ago, so Linux was still kind of young at the time, youngish at the time. Wasn't as widely as adopted as it is now, and so that seemed like an exciting thing to me at the time. Got there and kind of, I don't want to say things that would seem derogatory towards Novell, but went through a layoff process there where the team that I was on was let go. I somehow remained and escaped that, but it was sort of it felt a little bit like an empty house after that. So I was happy to stay and kept working on projects, but eventually went to was interested in networking and finding other things to do, and went to a user group meeting here in the Valley, a Python user group meeting, I think, and I think it was held at the Mosey building at the time, and met some people there and explored the path after that.
Way cool. So, I mean, really, you've got such a background with the storage side of things, and then now with you're building a resume in networking. I mean, this is your destiny as SpaceMonkey, right?
Yeah. So okay. So yeah. Let me back up again a little bit. So when I was at Lincoln Lab, I took a course in distributed systems from Robert Morris. I don't know if that name rings a bell with anybody. Robert Morris, if you Google him, he's the guy that invented the first internet worm, the great internet worm of 1988. That before most of us knew what the internet was, that crippled the internet.
Wow.
Yeah. So very smart guy, and actually I took this course from him not knowing that background, and nobody asked him about it in the class, and I think that's because everybody knew that was not the topic he wanted to talk about. But he actually launched that worm inadvertently, apparently. It was more of I think a research, well, who knows what was the real intent there, but he launched it from Cornell University, but through MIT's computers. So here he is years later, and MIT has hired him, even though it looked like the attack was coming from he made it look like the attack was coming from their campus. But he has done a lot of interesting research in distributed systems, and for the class that I took, we did a project in peer-to-peer backup systems that, after I left there, I started fresh with a new implementation of things that we've been thinking about, just as something that was really interesting to me, just pure academic interest. So I would, I'd work at Novell in the daytime, and in the evening I'd, occasionally come home and spend a few hours hacking on that. That system became the prototype that we used at SpaceMonkey to, demonstrate to investors that this kind of technology could work.
I would say that those couple hours hacking on that project have paid off.
They did, and it's interesting because I spent some time thinking about, boy, how could I turn this into a business, and I couldn't see a really clear path to that when I was working on it. It was only years later when the type of hardware that we produce at SpaceMonkey became cheap enough that it would make sense to marry that software with an actual piece of hardware and sell that as a combined unit.
So this is not your typical entrepreneur route, and you're not a typical entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I think a younger me would not have been interested in founding a company, and I think I'm not sure that the older me is that interested either, to be honest.
Okay.
I say that sort of half-heartedly because it's been a fantastic experience, but you know, I think I was always more interested in the creation of the technology and the building of the technology, not so much in, you know, the sticky issues of managing people and trying to figure out that tough problem. So I definitely would classify myself as more of a, actually more of an introvert than an extrovert. I think all of us as people are energized by other people, but to different degrees, right? And so I find myself, I think I did the classical example of, you know, if I spend a full day going out and pitching to investors, I really enjoy that actually. I like engaging and presenting and trying to convince people of something, but it drains me.
Yeah.
And I don't get drained when I'm alone, right? So at the same time, if I'm alone for a long time, I get lonely. So I'm not antisocial per se, but I think a lot of people that enter computer science fields are like me, right? Yeah. They gravitate towards technology because technology is energizing, and people can be the opposite.
Right. So I mean, and even your route here of, you know, taking this side project, working on it for so long, and do you feel like that played to your advantage? That, I mean, you probably knew this system inside and out because it was just something you were doing carefree for so long, and then all of a sudden you could marry it with a monetization model. And when the direction arrived for how to monetize it, was it just full speed ahead and it just like everything's falling into place, or
yeah,
is it different?
Good question. I definitely would not characterize our path as everything falling into place.
Okay.
It's I think even you know, there's this thing in the startup world that maybe you guys have talked about this at a previous startup grind, but imposter syndrome.
It's not been mentioned explicitly.
Okay. So I think it's fairly common for people to feel like they are faking their way through things. I think that's true of all of us whenever we tackle something that we're not comfortable with, right? Yeah. Getting out of your comfort zone. And so I'm trying to remember what question you just asked me. So
it's essentially because, you know, things weren't all falling into place.
Right, okay, so yeah, okay, so I'll get back to that about how things are either falling into place or not, but one thing that was nice about the way that I got to play with the system before even thinking about trying to make a business out of it is that it was a very slow development model, where, you know, I couldn't devote 40 hours of my own time to it, let alone 40 hours times 5 guys to it.
Right.
And so that meant that I had time to really think about and mull over design choices and architectural choices. I had time to, you know, when I hit a tough problem, to go out and read a bunch of papers on that problem of other researchers working on it and get a bunch of ideas. And so, you know, it was a good experience in just really carefully thinking about the problem and the problem space and how to solve issues in that problem space and learning from others, and even in some cases waiting for other people to develop technologies that I could then use to incorporate into the system. That's a luxury that you don't ever have, I don't think, in a startup. You have to go full speed.
Right.
So when we did get some funding and hire some employees, you know, I think luckily we hired some guys that are smarter than I am.
Sure.
To re-implement things, to build pieces of the system that were drastically different than the way I built them, and to go fast. And I think that's a different model that is also very beneficial in that you want people to move quickly, and you want to move quickly even if you're going in the wrong direction, because it's almost more valuable to find out how to fail and, and what to do, what not to do, than it is to try to do it perfectly, because you can't anticipate. You can't build a perfect product. You've got to build a very flawed product and get it in front of people, because you're going to learn that even the most perfect product that you dreamed of and that you built is terribly flawed when it's in front of people. So, so those are two very different models, and I think one is, you know, being able to develop something without a time frame is an incredible luxury and very therapeutic. But it's not ideal, especially in terms of finding, you know, that product market fit that we always talk about in the startup world.
So do you find yourself missing that luxury at times?
Sure, yeah, there's part of me that would love to just hole up and build whatever I want to build.
Right.
And forget about what the market wants or what consumers want, and forget about that there's a segment of the market that's really tech savvy, and there's another segment that doesn't know how to even install an app or uninstall an app. So yeah, I mean, that's nice. But when you define success as making a difference in the world, there's clearly one of those that's better than the other.
So with your model of picking a direction and running, how do you fail gracefully, and maybe share an experience of when you did or didn't? Good question.
So yeah, I think for us, there's a saying that I think a lot of people have said. So I won't try and quote any individual, but if you're not ashamed of your product when it gets to market, you've waited too long to get it to market. I think that's true. I think you have to get something out there that's way smaller in vision than what you have in your mind, that's incomplete, but that has some sort of core functionality that is valuable to people, and you have to focus on that value. And I think there's a lot of value in tight constraints. There's, going back to art, there's value in the fact that the canvas is only a certain size.
Right.
So that's good. It's good to have constraints. It's good to embrace those. It's in our case at SpaceMonkey, I think boy, we've made a ton of mistakes. Many of them mistakes that we should have known better, and many of them mistakes that other people told us that might be a mistake, and we had to learn the hard way. I'm trying to think of some I can tell you. There are some that I can't tell you.
That's fair.
Maybe let's come back to that one in a minute.
Okay.
I'll give it some more thought.
Yeah. So now let's talk about getting the money. I know you ran a Kickstarter campaign, and either in conjunction, there was also a little bit of an incubator participation. Let's hear about both of those and what your thoughts were and plan, and whether it followed that plan or not.
Okay, good. Yeah. So we both. So let me tell maybe. Let me go back even before that, if that's right.
Yeah.
I was fat, dumb, and happy working at Mozy. I spent about 5 years there, and watched a lot of my coworkers leave for other opportunities. And there was one guy that I spent a lot of time there. We'd sometimes play ideas off of each other about, hey, you want to go do something on our own and see if we can make something work. He eventually left, and we stayed in touch, and he eventually talked me into doing this. That's my co-founder, Clint Gordon Carroll. But it was, there were family concerns there. I had a daughter who needed to have a kidney out, and that happened right before I quit. And the deal I made with my wife is that we would make sure we had enough money in the bank to pay for health insurance for the gap that we thought we'd have between then and when we raised money and could have health insurance again. That gap ended up being a lot longer than we expected. We would drive out to the Bay Area in either his truck or my car, and we'd set up these appointments with investors, and we'd go pitch, and they'd listen and they'd be really interested, but let's talk again in a month, or hey, when you've figured out this part, call us. And it's just a typical kind of thing that I think investors do when they don't want to say no, because none of them want to say no.
Right.
They all want to say, keep me in mind when it makes sense. So we did that for a long time, and got to a point where we just said, we've gone, I think 4 months now, and that's sort of the time limit we've given ourselves, and we haven't raised money. Do we keep going? And so we did. We did keep going. We found a way, through some personal sacrifice on both of our ends, and eventually found a way to convince somebody to give us that first yes that caused the others to say yes.
So I want to hear how you convinced your wife to keep going.
Yeah, okay. So actually, I remember having that conversation with her and saying, look, it's been 4.5 months. We initially said, let's see if we should be able to raise money in 3 months, or it's not going to happen. I think I actually was the one who said, I think it's time to maybe call it. And she looked at me and she said, you're not quitting yet.
Oh, wow.
So it was awesome. It was awesome. She was very supportive. We've been talking about maybe doing something like this for a long time. Mm-hmm. And because I was able to get a little bit of financial security, not enough to retire on or anything like that, but a little bit with my work at Mosey, that made it a lot much easier for us to do that. Mm-hmm. Looking at the bank account and the amount of money that we not only forwent in salary but paid out in expenses during that time is shocking. I wouldn't have thought, even 10 years ago that I'd ever spend that much money or lose that much money in opportunity costs to try and do something like this. But we kept going and we found a way, and that's been true I think several times since then. Again, I think people that do startups, we like to always say that things are going well. Well, they almost for sure aren't. Right? They almost for sure aren't always going well.
You're all liars.
Yeah, we're all liars. We're all liars. So there are some tough times, and there are times when it looks really dark, mm-hmm. and when you're wondering, can we go 3 more months?
Yeah.
And there have been times when we've really had to power through that, and it's fun when you can. Yeah. And I think we've been lucky.
That's awesome. Yeah. And kudos to your wife. That's so cool. So now, so that was the preface leading up to getting the money. You convinced one person that helped convince a couple others?
Yeah, I think this is pretty common, and I'm sure some of the audience has probably done this and gone out and raised money. Investors are they're very smart. Mm-hmm. They are smart enough, I think, to recognize that having somebody else say the first yes is cheaper than them doing the work to say the first yes. And I mean that in terms of, if you're the first money in, you really have to believe, right? And you have to have done some homework. And it's much easier to say yes to somebody that already has somebody else who's done that.
Yeah.
They call it social proof. So yeah, it becomes at some point, it becomes a bit of a game of trying to figure out how to make that happen. Okay. And there are great blogs out there on, advice about fundraising and how to play that game. It's an interesting thing you have to navigate.
So, getting those people, did they lay the foundation for getting you into the incubator you participated in?
Yeah. So what we did, we raised a small round of I think about $800,000. Okay. That was enough to hire a couple guys, and it seemed like, boy, when you go from 0 to $800,000, it seems like a lot of money. It's actually not when you think about hiring a team of 5 guys. That doesn't actually last that long. Yeah. But we raised that money, and what happened next is we moved out of some office space that I'd been bumming from my brother-in-law into Salt Lake Community College, mm-hmm. That has sort of an incubator there, and they invited us to come and sit there. So we were there for a couple of months. We at about the same time we were invited to participate in the Launch Festival. Okay. The Launch Festival, for those who know or don't know, there are several conferences that startups go to out in the Bay Area or in the tech community. One is TechCrunch Disrupt, another one's called Demo. Y Combinator Demo Days is another one. The Launch Festival is one that split off of TechCrunch Disrupt, one of the founders of that conference. Jason Calacanis formed that. He was an early believer in what we were doing, mm-hmm. And he, prior to that conference, had called us up and said, "You guys are coming, right?" And we weren't ready. We had lots of conversations about this, about the fact that we were not going to do one of those conferences until we had a product that we could actually give to people we were demoing the product to. And we were quite a ways away from having that ready. And I remember, sitting in this conference room with Clint and looking each other in the eye and saying, should we do this? Oh, I don't know. Should we do it now? Should we tell them no? And I think the decision came down to one of trying to be bold and courageous and really thinking about, if we say no to this now, is that really just us running away from an opportunity that's right here? And so we decided to go. And there's still some debate. We still sometimes do the thought experiment of did we go too soon? Because maybe we could have gone a year later.
Sure.
And had something a little bit more ready. But we went and we won the prize as best new startup among all these 40 other companies that went to this conference at this conference center in downtown San Francisco. And suddenly everybody wanted to give us money.
Right.
And that was cool. That was really cool.
So this is a pretty big deal. I mean, so what are a couple other names that have come from this incubator before? Yeah.
So they claim Dropbox.
Okay.
Although that was before the split off of TechCrunch Disrupt. I'm trying to think of some of the other big names that came out of there. There are a couple others that are well known, but Dropbox is probably the biggest.
Yeah. So I mean, you win this, and people start calling you.
Yeah. You get a lot of attention from the press. You get a lot of attention from potential customers, from investors. You suddenly get meetings with people. You get people who you thought you might not ever get a meeting with calling you to have a meeting. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I'd say you made the right decision there. You win it, and then so where does Kickstarter come in, and why did you do the crowdfunding?
Yeah. So Kickstarter for us was more about customer development than it was about funding.
Okay.
Although it did help with that as well.
Sure.
We initially, I think for any sort of technical product, you want to connect with early adopters, with guys who are tech savvy, who are willing to tolerate an early version of a product, who are excited about technology and excited not just about the product they can get off the shelf at Best Buy, but about the potential of a product that's not in Best Buy yet. And so we thought, Kickstarter was the ideal place to find those people. It turns out Kickstarter, there are a lot of those people at Kickstarter, but it was big enough by the time we launched that there were a lot of other people there too that were more, that viewed Kickstarter as just another form of Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Right? So we got interesting responses from people. We shipped product we started shipping product to our Kickstarter backers a couple of months late, and the response was very bifurcated to that. On the one hand, you had the early adopters who said, "Wow, this came to me only 2 months late. That's the best I've ever done on Kickstarter." And then on the other hand, you had the guys that thought this was an e-commerce platform who were saying, 2 months late, I want my money back. What else are you going to give me? Are you going to give me a second one? So dealing with that sort of diverse customer base is, I think, a problem that is good to have as well.
Mm-hmm. So now to where you're at today. So things are running smoothly. How big's your team? And then, let's say a word on what's down the pipeline.
Great, yeah. So we are 14 people right now. It's still a small team.
That's pretty good.
But we are right now hoping to expand, hoping to almost double the engineering team in the next 6 to 10 months.
Is that a big feat with 14 people? Okay.
Yes. So, bringing a bunch of new people on all at once, I think, is a big challenge culturally and
for sure.
Practices wise. So that'll be an interesting challenge over the next few months. We've got even before we delivered any product outside of the United States, there were SpaceMonkeys on every continent except for Antarctica, so people had smuggled them out. We've now delivered internationally as well to our Kickstarter backers, and there's product all over the world. Mm-hmm. These devices talk to each other regardless of political boundary, and that's kind of cool.
That is nice.
So you've got, essentially you've got, potentially you've got Russians cooperating with Ukrainians to store data. I guess that's good. That's where we're at. Where we're going is towards a very quick acceleration of that adoption. We have some channels, some channels to market and development right now that we think are really going to explode. And that's exciting, it's also terrifying.
Right.
Because we do need to ramp up not just the engineering team, but there are places in the technology that need to be shored up to really deal with that. There's logistical challenges, there's team challenges, there's marketing, sales, support challenges, but it should be an exciting ride over the next couple of years.
That's awesome. All right, guys, let's give it up for Alen. So what I want to do is just give the audience a few minutes to ask a couple questions that they might have. So if you have a question, if you raise your hand, I'll come bring a mic to you.
So, Leslie,
Hi, Leslie.
if in that chair was you when you were still at Mosey, you had 5 minutes to talk to yourself, what would you tell yourself?
I think the first thing would be the same thing that you tell a person who's about to jump off of a cliff into the water and is scared, and then you do it and you find out that the water's just fine, right? So that's a lot how the experience was for me of leaving a known salary, a known team, a known career to go do to stop being a software engineer and become a founder of a company. That was terrifying. And to get up on the stage at launch conference was terrifying. And to do all these things that I've done are all terrifying and out of my comfort zone. But what I've definitely found is that by doing them, they become comfortable and they become easy. Lessons that you guys all know, but applied to doing something like this, I think they apply.
Other questions?
Formerly a Mosey employee.
Oh, hey.
So my question for you was, when you create a new product like SpaceMonkey, for instance, that's basically creating a new category for the way that files are stored and things like that. And when you already have your competition as well, like Mosey, Dropbox, for instance, which actually does the storage in the cloud, data centers, and so on. I guess, what challenges were you facing as far as in the marketplace of helping people understand the actual need and why it is more valuable and better than what's already accessible, right? Especially when you have people that are already using these services.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's a challenge that we're still facing. I think there is a big user education component to what we're doing. On our side are a lot of consumer experience right now with the cloud. There are so many people I've talked to who have said, I have 400 gigs or I have 800 gigs of photos and videos, and I tried storing it in the cloud and it was too slow, or it was too expensive, or it was too slow and too expensive, or I don't trust it. NSA has, all of those concerns are things that we think we have answers for. And so for that niche, for that segment of the market that has had some experience with those other technologies, it's actually, I think, easiest to sell to them initially. Beyond that though, yeah, I mean for people that have never tried the cloud or have never thought about doing that or have thought about it but don't know how to do it, it is hard because the pain that we're trying to address in the market are pains that are specific to how the cloud works today. And so we worried a little bit about that. We worried, maybe we're too early. Maybe this is a product or a type of product that needs to come out a few years from now when everybody has gone to the cloud. The other thing we have that works in our advantage though is that there is a lot of marketing around the cloud. And so there are a lot of people going to the cloud, the traditional cloud, and trying it, and they are running into problems. And those are the people that we're trying to find.
All right, maybe time for one more question.
So this is a question about, you went to Kickstarter. In another company I worked at, they considered doing a Kickstarter, but was concerned that by going to Kickstarter, it would make them appear to be in a bad place, like their product wasn't going to work, and so they were throwing a Hail Mary out there. Did you have those same concerns, or what made you decide to take that step into the Kickstarter realm?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly there are pluses and minuses to doing a Kickstarter. For us, being a startup that hadn't technically delivered product yet, there was a lot more upside than there was downside, it seemed like. We also had a lot of support from our investors and advisors in going there. A lot of them were excited about Kickstarter. So, and I think that's important. You know, you don't want to do something like that that's potentially risky without the support of your team, whether that's investors or advisors or whether that's other people in the company. I think everybody needs to be on board with that because it will be a very public success or failure, right? You can't hide from the fact that you tried to raise $40,000 on Kickstarter and can only get 10 guys to pledge. Like that's terrifying because it does involve more than just having a good product. It involves figuring out how to get somebody to write about you, figuring out how to get people that already know about you to go there and buy product. It involves driving, you know, a lot like putting up a website. You can't just put up a website and expect customers to come. You've got to drive traffic there. So Kickstarter can be terrifying. We felt like we were in a position where even if it failed, we'd be fine.
All right, guys, give it up one more time for Alen.
Thank you.